Ever feel like you're just wading through information, but not really getting it? Like you want the real core of something fast.
Yeah, the pure essence, without all the noise.
Exactly. Well, that's our plan today on the deep dive. We've got this really unique source material. It's called a Morning Murli, and this one's dated April 25th, 2025.
And what's interesting, right, is what it is. It's not, your standard report or article. It reads more like spiritual guidance, almost like a daily reflection.
Mm-hmm.
It's got questions in it, answers, even a line from a song, all pointing towards a certain way to live, to find meaning.
That song line really stood out to me. Take us away from this land of sin to a world of rest and comfort. Sort of sets a tone, doesn't it?
It really does.
So our mission today is to really dive into the main message of this Murli. What's the guidings here for, well, finding real happiness, for reaching a higher state? It outlines some very specific directions.
Definitely. And we should probably say this comes from a very particular spiritual viewpoint. It might be unfamiliar territory for some of you listening.
But that's the interesting part, right?
Exactly. It gives us this different lens to look at things, existence, our own potential, how we might, grow.
Okay, let's get into the first big concept then. It's called Shrimat. The Murli explains it as the elevated directions of the One Father.
Right, who is later identified as God or Shiv Baba in their terminology.
And the promise tied to following this Shrimat is, well, it's huge. Constant happiness, an elevated state of being.
It is. The emphasis is really on focusing only on this one Father's guidance. And it makes a very clear break, saying you should renounce directions from, quote, bodily beings.
That's quite absolute. Makes you think about relying so heavily on just one source.
It does. And that connects directly to a question the Murli itself poses.
Which one's that?
It asks, which children's intellects have not yet stopped wandering?
Ah, okay. And the answer it gives.
It says those who lack full faith in God's directions, those who sort of keep a foot on each side.
Meaning, like trying to follow the Father but also doing other things?
Exactly, like still doing traditional practices. The Murli mentions bathing in the Ganges or following human gurus alongside trying to follow Shrimat. It suggests this creates a conflict.
A divided loyalty almost.
That's the implication. It asks, can you really integrate these different paths without some internal clash?
And the consequence, according to the Murli,
is that you keep stumbling. It presents it as a direct outcome of not fully committing to Shrimat. The message is pretty clear. Unwavering faith in this one path is key.
which sort of flows into how it views the current state of humanity. It loops back to that song, right? Take us away from this land of sin.
Yes, and it says you no longer sing this. The interpretation being offered is that now is the land of sin. This time is seen as a degraded state.
A low point. You hear echoes of that in other traditions too, this idea of cycles.
Definitely. And it contrasts this present state with what it calls the highest on high human beings.
The deities of ancient Farad.
Right, who are supposedly full of all virtues. It paints this picture of a golden past versus a diminished present.
It makes you think about how different belief systems explain these, well, apparent ups and downs in history.
And what's really interesting is the Murli's assertion that people today just don't know who elevated those deities in the first place.
Ah.
And it adds that those same beings have now become totally impure. It really reinforces this idea of cycles of decline and presumably potential renewal within their framework.
Mm-hmm. So who is this highest on high father then? How does the Murli identify this figure?
Well, it says this is the one that sages and holy people have always prayed to, so positioned as a kind of universal focus of devotion historically.
Okay.
And the central belief here is that this father has now come back, arrived,
Yeah.
with a mission
It just
to take his children back, basically, to elevate them again through his shrima, his instructions. It's all about return and upliftment.
And it draws a sharp contrast, doesn't it, between following the father and following Ravan.
Yes. The Murli claims that following Raven's directions is what corrupted people's intellects in the first place. So you have this clear good versus bad influence presented.
Which then leads into that critique of traditional practices we touched on earlier.
Exactly. It gets very specific, challenging things like bathing in the Ganges or following gurus.
Yeah, it makes you consider how different faiths view rituals or human guides in connecting with the divine.
The argument is quite direct. It states the Ganges is not the purifier,
Wow.
and that following human dictates over God's directions shows a lack of real faith. Again, it pushes for that exclusive reliance.
It uses that analogy, a foot in each boat.
Yes, which is quite a vivid image, isn't it? Suggesting that trying to straddle different paths leads to instability, maybe even falling.
So moving forward a bit, the Murli actually gives a specific name for this father, right?
It does. It clarifies the name is Shiv Baba, or Shiva, which is, important context for understanding the specific language they use, like knowing the main character's name.
And it explains something unique about Shiva's manifestation too, not rebirth in the usual sense.
Right. The teaching is that Shiva doesn't take rebirth, but instead enters a specific existing body. That's a key theological point for them, explaining how the divine interacts with the physical world in this particular cycle.
And it seems aimed at clearing up confusion, perhaps, about the many names for God.
It seems that way. By stating Shiva is the real name, it tries to establish a single, clear identity for the ultimate source.
Okay, then the focus shifts slightly to Vishnu. And the Murli offers a pretty distinct take here, too.
It does. It describes Vishnu not as the traditional four-armed deity, but as a dual form.
Representing what?
Representing the family path. This is quite a departure from standard Hindu iconography.
And it contrasts this family path, which it says the father establishes, with the path of isolation.
Yes, the path followed by sannyasis, ascetics. So it's setting up two distinct approaches to spiritual life, with different origins according to this teaching.
And it makes a practical point about ascetics, too.
Yeah, it observes that even though they renounce worldly action, sannyasis still rely on householders for food and basic needs, pointing out a kind of interdependence.
Okay, let's switch gears slightly. A really central teaching seems to be soul consciousness.
Oh, absolutely fundamental. The instruction is basically, consider yourselves to be souls and play your parts through your bodies. Identify with the inner self, not the outer shell.
Because focusing on the body consciousness, that's where problems arise.
That's the idea. It's seen as the source of mistakes, of limitations. The soul is eternal, the body is temporary, so the focus should be on the soul. You see this kind of distinction in many philosophies, of course.
And this soul consciousness, it's linked directly to remembering the Father.
Yes. The Murli suggests that this constant remembrance brings tangible benefits. Health, freedom from disease, it even specifies for 21 births, and a higher spiritual status overall.
So a direct link between your inner awareness and your outer reality within this system.
Exactly. And conversely, being stuck in body consciousness, especially near the end of life, can actually lower your status.
How so?
It suggests it could lead to a less favorable position in the future, even becoming, quote, maids and servants.
That's very specific. It mentions visions of maids in dowries.
Yes, it uses that imagery, presumably from visions followers might have had, as a concrete example of this potential reduced status. It's a way to illustrate the consequence.
And then there's this concept of Maya, or illusion.
Right. Maya is presented as this opposing force, something that actively tries to pull you away from your spiritual focus.
And it gets stronger as you progress.
Apparently so. The Murli notes that Maya intensifies for those who are making spiritual strides, trying harder to distract them from remembering the Father. It's like the obstacles get bigger the further you go.
You hear that in other traditions, too, the idea of tests increasing.
Definitely. It's a common theme in contemplative paths.
Okay, so what about the rewards? If you do follow Shramat successfully, what's promised?
Well, the language is quite striking. It talks about an income of multi-millions at every step.
Well, leading to what?
Ultimately leading to unimaginable wealth and prosperity in the coming golden age. So significant spiritual and material benefits are envisioned.
And it contrasts this future state with the present, calling it a corrupt kingdom.
Yes, the contrast is very sharp. It's a vision of a future paradise achieved by following these specific directions. That kind of utopian future is a powerful motivator in many belief systems.
The Murli also warns against something called adulterated remembrance. What's that?
Basically, remembering anyone other than the one Father. The focus has to be absolutely pure and singular.
It really doubles down on that exclusivity, doesn't it?
It does. It stresses listening only to the Father, remembering only the Father. That unwavering focus is presented as absolutely crucial.
And purity is a big theme too, right? Not just mental focus, but physical.
Yes, purity in a broad sense, physical and mental, is seen as vital for progress. It even mentions taking precautions with food and drink. It's a holistic view.
Connecting inner discipline with outer lifestyle choices.
Exactly. The idea is that what you consume, how you live, it all directly impacts your spiritual journey. They're intertwined.
Things make a rather dramatic turn with predictions about the future.
Uh-huh. The Murli speaks of widespread destruction, fire, bombs, natural calamities. It paints a pretty intense picture.
And specifically mentions India, or Bharat, facing the worst of it.
Yes, it singles out Faraq for the greatest difficulties. It frames this as a time of major global upheaval and transformation.
But it's not just doom and gloom. There's a purpose to mentioning this.
It seems so. It's presented as an opportunity, a time for self-reflection, to look at your own service, your own progress towards becoming, well, the goal is stated as becoming equal to Narayan.
Who represents a very elevated state.
Extremely elevated, yes. A state of great purity, power, and spiritual attainment within this belief system.
So how does one navigate this? Does it offer practical advice?
It does suggest keeping a daily chart.
Like a spiritual progress tracker?
Kind of, yeah. For self-improvement, monitoring your efforts, identifying where you need to grow, it implies a structured, conscious approach.
And it reminds you that Maya is still active.
Constantly. It stresses the need for continuous effort, for precaution, until you reach what it calls the karmatit stage.
Which means?
A state beyond karma, beyond the cause and effect of actions. So liberation isn't instant. It requires ongoing vigilance and effort.
Okay. And how does this particular Murli wrap up?
It ends with words of encouragement, blessings, conveying love, remembrance, and good morning from the mother, the father, Babdada, specific terms within their cosmology. It feels quite personal.
Is there a specific blessing mentioned?
Yes, a blessing for developing judgment power and controlling power.
For what purpose?
To become a constant embodiment of success, both in worldly tasks and spiritual ones. These powers are seen as essential for navigating life effectively.
And for helping others too.
Exactly. It explains these powers are needed to understand people and serve them properly. So discernment and influence are key parts of spiritual maturity here.
And there's a final slogan.
A very potent one. Make the Almighty Authority Father your companion, and Maya will become a paper tiger.
Meaning, if you're aligned with God, the illusions or obstacles lose their power.
That's the essence of it. They become insignificant, like a paper tiger, easily overcome.
There's also an Aviac signal. What's that about?
It's remain constantly victorious with the awareness of the combined form. The explanation is that problems arise if you just see yourself as a server, doing tasks.
Wow, okay.
True strength, it says, comes from seeing yourself as a godly server, where your remembrance of the Father and your service are one combined thing, not separate activities.
Okay, so pulling all this together, the core message of this morning Murli really seems to be about absolute faith.
Unwavering faith, yes. And exclusive adherence to the Father's Shrimat, these elevated directions. That's presented as the one true path.
The path to lasting happiness and that higher state of being they talk about.
Exactly. That's the promise laid out in this source.
It definitely gives you a distinct perspective to chew on. It makes you wonder, how does that idea of one single direct source of guidance feel in your own search for meaning?
And does that critique of other practices, the Gonjis, the gurus, does that make you reconsider anything about your own beliefs or actions?
Good questions. This dive into the Murlis certainly offers a unique framework. It encourages you, the listener, to think about spiritual loyalty, where guidance comes from, and maybe different ways to think about transformation and growth.
It really invites you to contemplate its specific view of life, its challenges, and its ultimate potential. A different way of looking at things, for sure.